Okay, we're going to talk about congruent polygons. So congruent polygons have um, congruent angles. I'm going to write it down here. I'm going to write congruent angles. Okay, and those are just, angles that have the same measure. And then they have corresponding parts. So that's the sides, okay, are corresponding. Okay, so when we name congruent parts, we want to look at um, the ordering. So you see P, Q, R, S, T, U. That tells us what parts are congruent. So let's first label the angles. And also, if we look at our tick marks here, those tell us what are congruent. So here R is congruent to U, which makes sense because R and U are in the same spot. So we can say angle R is congruent to angle U. We can say angle Q is congruent to angle T. They both have two tick marks. And then angle P is congruent to angle S. Okay, so those are our congruent angles. Then our sides. To do our sides, what we have to do is we have to look at our ordering here. So PQ, so line P or side PQ is congruent to ST. So you see how they're in order. So then QR would be congruent to TU, and then RP would be, oh, it doesn't look like a P. RP is congruent to US. So you just use the letters that they tell you, and that's how you put them in order. So for number 2 here, I'll zoom in a little bit. I'll start with my 1 tick marks to find my angles. So angle C is congruent to angle G. Angle B is congruent to angle F because they both have 2 tick marks. Angle A is congruent to angle E, and also is an A and E in the same place, so those are congruent. And then our last one is angle D is congruent to angle H. Then we have to do our sides. So we just start and go in order. So AB, side AB is congruent to side EF. Side BC is congruent to FG. Side CD is congruent to GH. And side DA is congruent to side HE. So we have our congruent parts. So that's how we do that. Now, if they give us a figure and then they give us some values, they want us to figure out what these values are. Okay, so they told us LMN is congruent to RST. Okay, so that means angle L is congruent to angle R, angle M is congruent to angle S, and angle N is congruent to angle T. So since we know that, we can kind of label these. So we have 63 over an N, so we know this is also 63. So that would help us find X, okay? Because we know all 3 angles in a triangle equal 180, we can do 93 plus 63 plus 3x, and we know that equals 180. So that gives me 156 plus 3x equals 180. Subtract 156, and I get 24 equals 3x, so we know x is 8. Alright, and then to find y, we know SR is congruent to ML. So we already know x, so we know 3x plus y equals 43, because we know those are congruent. And x is 8, so 3 times 8 plus y equals 43. 24 plus y equals 43. Subtract 24 from both sides, and we get y equals 19. Alright, 3a, I've kind of written all over the place here, so I'm going to do this down here. So identify congruent parts and corresponding parts. So let's just do our angles, and we can do it from our congruent statement. So let's look over here. Here's my congruent statements. So I know angle A is congruent to angle C. Angle B is congruent to angle D. I'm just matching. Angle G is congruent to angle E, and angle H is congruent to angle F. Okay, same order. And then to do my sides, I would say AB is congruent to CD, BG is congruent to DE, GH is congruent to EF, and HA is congruent to FC. Now we need to find the value of x. Well, here we know C and D, and C and D is congruent to AB. Okay, so we know that. And they're both 90. So we want to find x, and we have the only statement that has an x in it is angle H. Well, angle H is congruent to angle F. So what we can do is we can set 4x plus 5 equal to 105, since we know H is congruent to F. And so we get 4x equals 100, and x equals 25. All right, that's it.